Oh, good afternoon. I would like to welcome our chamber members and any viewers to what is our inaugural, our very first City Connection program. And just by way of background, the City Connection program is part of the Chamber's outreach and part of the Chamber's efforts to work with our local municipalities on the things that affect us all as a community, our businesses, and our neighborhoods and our residents. And so, what we're going to do is take a little time to talk to each of the member municipalities, the mayors of those municipalities, so that maybe as a community we can get a little feel for the issues that affect all our municipalities as we see from the mayors who lead our municipalities. And so, for the very first one of these city programs, we're going to start with Taylor Lake Village, and more particularly, Taylor Lake Village's Mayor, John Keeney. And, John, if I could get you on and maybe we'll introduce you. John, welcome.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Glad to be here.
Good, John. Why don't you give us a little thumbnail sketch of your background, kind of what it is and how you came to be mayor?
Sure, be glad to. Uh, my whole career prior to being mayor was in the oil and chemical industry. I'm an engineer and also a psychologist. And I often explain to people I'm a psychologist to explain why I became an engineer. But I literally volunteered to be mayor of Taylor Lake Village. My wife Lillian at that time passed, and she was mayor elect and volunteered and was appointed mayor in 2013. I've been there ever since.
All right. So that's about 8 years then, isn't it?
You got it.
Okay. Now, one of the things I understand is as a mayor of Taylor Lake Village, there are other local mayor and city council groups that you participate in as well. Can you talk
Yeah,
about that a little bit?
I'll be glad to. We had a meeting at BAHEP yesterday, which is a fine organization and is obviously focused on economic development and cooperation among all the cities. What they do extremely well and what we do as mayor participants is avoid competing with each other. Each city has its own unique attributes. We recognize that. We don't try to do anything to harm a sister city in any shape, form, or fashion. And we cooperate on common issues legislatively, especially that impact the small cities, of which there's about 31 in Harris County, by the way.
Okay. 31 in Harris County, and we have a whole host of local municipalities in the Clear Lake Area Chamber service area from Taylor Lake Village, Alago, Webster, all the rest. Correct?
That's true. And in addition, we also interface with Galveston County because what we do in Harris County impacts Galveston and vice versa. So
Good.
we take the time to integrate those folks into our conversations. Well, I'm also a member of what's called Mayor and Council, and that incorporates all the folks in Harris County as opposed to the ones here in our part of Harris County and Galveston County. And we have common interests, for instance, around the Port of Houston. We have an appointee that helps direct that, the Houston ship pilots, the upcoming potential coastal spine that we're also very interested in. Mayor and council will probably have an appointee, which will be one of the mayors that will contribute to the governance of the overall coastal spine system.
Well, always nice to hear we're working together. But let's step back for a minute and let's probably most people know where Taylor Lake Village is, but why don't you give us a little thumbnail of Taylor Lake Village geographically and kind of what it looks like?
Sure. Taylor Lake Village is nestled actually between Seabrook, El Lago, and Pasadena. And we occupy less than 10 square miles. We have around 4,000 people in terms of population. And Taylor Lake Village was formed in 1961 to actually avoid being annexed by any of the larger entities. And it was formed around the notion of a single residential community. And 99% of Taylor Lake Village is, in fact, single family residential. We have a total of six uh, small businesses there. And that number is probably going to double because we're developing at the corner of Kirby and Nassau Road 1, which is the grand entrance to Taylor Lake Village. We're going to be putting in some commercial and also some penthouse kind of homes for people right there on that corner. What that means is quite simply for the residents of Taylor Lake Village, we're going to be adding a total of $65 million of gross value to our assessment, which ultimately keeps our tax rate either the same or possibly reducing it over time.
Yeah. Wow. Always an important thing. And for our viewers that maybe not live Taylor Lake Village, we're talking about the corner down there of Nassau Road 1 and Kirby, where what was colloquially known as the Sunken Gardens is, the old boat superstore, correct?
That is correct. And if you drive down Kirby, and halfway between Kirby and Red Bluff Road is Taylor Lake Village City Hall, and it's right next door to probably the crown jewel of Taylor Lake Village is our 45-acre park. We have disc golf, and I have to tell you, disc golfers don't care about weather. They're there in rain. They were there during this most recent cold spell, casting those discs willy-nilly all over the place. We have access to Taylor Lake, which has access to Clear Lake. We have a fishing pier. We have playgrounds for kids. Instead, we have statuary that we've had a tree sculpture, a chainsaw guy come in, and instead of just whacking a beautiful 100-year-old oak down, we take it down to the point where we can convert it to a tree structure. And so we try to utilize those unfortunately dead trees in something to enhance the enjoyment of our park.
Well, that's obviously interesting, and it's certainly an advantage that we have in Taylor Lake Village, and appreciate your work on all of those projects. As mayor of Taylor Lake Village, and in your experience, there are different kinds of municipal organizations, home rule cities, and others. And what kind is Taylor Lake Village, and how is that affected, or how have you learned that's affected the administration of your municipality?
Well, we are a general law city, and if you look at the literally the regulations that we have to follow, if you take a normal 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper and you stack them a foot high, those are the regulations that are imposed on a small general law city. We're structured in a way that mayor and council, the mayor is elected every 2 years, as are all council members, and we do that in alternate years so that there's not 100% turnover. And all positions are at-large positions in Taylor Lake Village, and so people are really fairly represented, and anyone can run for any of the offices when they become available. And we hold just local elections for that sort of thing. We have monthly and sometimes 2 a month council meetings, and they're open meetings, and we publish them. And as every other city in the state of Texas, we are subject to the Open Meetings Act. And so nothing really gets done behind closed doors and in secret. I have very little delegation of authority. What I do, I have emergency delegation, and in emergencies, there's quite a few things I can do. But conversely, past that, mayor and council for Taylor Lake Village is accountable for the spending of the money, the policies that we have in the city, and the ordinances that we pass to keep our city functional, and the basic communications of Taylor Lake Village.
Well, John, you've talked about organizationally, and you talked about a stack of regulations that laws that the Taylor Lake Village has to abide by. And I take it by necessity then, as the mayor and as the leading administrator of this small city, I take it you find that you have to deal with other governmental agencies and can you give us kind of a feel for some of that, what that involves for our
Absolutely.
viewers?
Well, on a federal level, number one, when I was sworn in as mayor, I had to hold my hand up and swear to uphold the Constitution of this country that we all love and adore. And then, secondly, the federal government has its own particular rules that we have to follow. Anything that has to do with federal regs, we have to abide by. More specifically, what impacts us and people more directly is the Federal Emergency Management Association, or FEMA for short. And FEMA is very dictatorial on the requirements necessary to maintain people's flood insurance. And out of the 1,500 homes that we have in Taylor Lake Village, around 1,250 of them are insured by FEMA. And FEMA audits us. They make sure that the city of Taylor Lake Village is doing everything to maintain the discounts that enable people to buy this insurance and maintain our certification so that people can protect their homes from flood. And that's just one example. Uh, uh, and it's a very difficult example, but any of the EPA regulations were required, and sub to the EPA regulations on a federal basis, that translates into the state of Texas.
Yeah.
And we have an organization called TCEQ who administers that program. And so we interface with the state of Texas. Guess what? Harris County has its own set of rules. And I'll give you, for instance, if our ordinances did not meet their requirements for flood control, they would cut off services to Taylor Lake Village during emergencies or any other notion or occurrence that might impact Taylor Lake Village. And so we had to modify our ordinances to be in line with Harris counties, which has to be in line with the state, which has to be in line with the federal government. And, you know, that's stuff that people don't see and they don't want to see. And I don't blame them for not wanting to see. But conversely, it's what we deal with on a daily
So,
basis.
so on things like flood insurance, on things like roadway requirements, those are all things that are governed by, in the instance of flood insurance, federal government requirements, roadway requirements, Harris County, things of that nature, correct?
That is correct.
And then I suppose for a small municipality like Taylor Lake Village, Taylor Lake Village doesn't actually supply things like the water supply. So that comes through Lake Water Authority.
Oh, that's correct. Each of the cities has a choice of whether they provide total water and sewer service or they effectively contract it out. And when Taylor Lake Village was formed in the 1961, the people who ran the city at that time made a conscious decision not to get into the water business. And so Clear Lake City Water Authority effectively owns everything under the streets having to do with water and sewage. What that does for the city is it takes that burden off us, but conversely, it increases the burden on Clear Lake City Water Authority and the city to communicate with each other when we have situations such as this freeze. And a boil water initiative was initiated by Clear Lake City Water Authority. And we have to be very certain that we communicate it properly because the residents of Taylor Lake Village really don't care that it's Clear Lake City Water Authority. They expect the city to communicate that information. So that's what we do with that sort of situation.
Now, one thing, as I understand, of course, that Taylor Lake Village does have is it has its own police department, or it does in cooperation with another municipality. So, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, I'd be glad to. We have a phenomenal police department. We are being a small city. We have to share in the cost of our police department with the small city of El Lago. and I refer to them as a sister city because they're very similar to us in a lot of respects. They are on the opposite side of Taylor Lake, and so we touch them. Then Seabrook has a portion of the lake. And what we do is we have a police force that is very city local oriented. All of our officers are trained to be sensitive to people's needs. They are trained to deal with people in crisis who might be having a mental issue. Uh, our police go out of their way to help youth who are troubled, not to get into the judicial system and not to get arrested, but to correct their behaviors in a way that is productive for them and their families. In a way, our police force is both an enforcement and an agency that cares. And that's just part of being a small city. Some people joke about Taylor Lake Village, the little cities being Mayberry, uh, from the old Mayberry RFD program that was on uh, 50 years ago. But I have to tell you, in a way, we are. We have that small city flavor. The police have that small city caring. The police officers are known by everyone in the city who interfaces with them. When police night out occurs, guess what? We have some of our subdivisions who bring in uh, these food wagons and give out free food, and the police come, and guess what? They enjoy the free food too. And we just get to know each other better that way.
So, based on that description, that might sound like one of the reasons you would advocate or say maybe it's a good thing to live in a small municipality where you have your own law enforcement, your own control, and their neighbors and so forth.
Well, it's a huge benefit, and it's one of the attractions of a small place like Taylor Lake Village. People have many choices. When I came to Houston, I got transferred down here from New York, and I interfaced with realtors, and I could have lived any place in Houston that I chose to. And the small city environment, after being in beautiful downtown New York for some number of years, looked really attractive. And over the years, I've been transferred in and out, and I've come back to Taylor Lake Village because I know the people here, I know the circumstances. People are friendly. Our neighborhood homeowners associations communicate well with each other. Uh, and, and you don't ever feel isolated in a place like Taylor Lake Village. It's a personable place as opposed to being an impersonal kind of place that I perceive a lot of the larger cities to be.
And how long have you lived in Taylor Lake Village?
I have lived there since 1978, and I transferred in and out a few times, but mostly in Taylor Lake Village.
Yeah. Um, well, let me ask you, John. Just in terms of being the mayor, you've been the mayor for 8 years, and I'm sure you've had your share of citizen complaints, citizen concerns, and you've always got to balance issues of individual property owners and citizens' interest against the collective. What have you learned about that in those 8 years?
Well, it's an interesting balance. And one thing every mayor will tell you is you can't satisfy everyone all the time. And that's just the reality of being a mayor. But I'll give you a recent example. During this horrible freeze crisis that we had, post the crisis, when things were beginning to come back to some sense of normalcy, I get emails from people who are worried about the trash and whether it's going to pick up their damaged carpet that they want to put out. And from an attitudinal viewpoint, people want to get rid of rubbish as soon as they possibly can. And we use an outfit called AmeriWaste who does a phenomenal job in stressful situations like this. And bless their hearts, they literally picked up wet carpet out of people's yards and got it into their vehicles and got it out of sight so that people can move on, get their carpet replaced, all the above. One of the things that we did as a result of this crisis, two or three things that we did. One, we set up a warming center for people to come to Taylor Lake Village, and by gosh, they came. Secondly, when we had the water crisis, our sister city of El Lago still had water supply, and their mayor, John Skelton, was very generous in offering potable water to the citizens of Taylor Lake Village. And through just conversations with him, we set that up, and people in Taylor Lake Village had access to potable water during this crisis. Uh, in addition to the warming center, uh, we tried to offer as much comfort as we possibly could to people during this, and we've discovered that we're going to have to up our communications ability because people got overly concerned about things that weren't in our control. We couldn't control the grid at all, and but yet people needed to understand what was occurring, and so we're going to have to up our game in terms of communications. We're going to have to figure out new systems that we can implement.
Well, John, it's always good to hear examples of our little municipalities cooperating, getting more from shared resources in terms of meeting the larger needs of our community. But let me ask you a question. Let me get your insight on two things, related, if you will.
Sure.
You've been the mayor of Taylor Lake Village for 8 years, and you've also served on mayor council groups, strategic planning issues that affect these municipalities. So, kind of based on that experience, could you get us some feel for what the challenges you see coming forward for a city like Taylor Lake Village and the larger group of cities, small cities that are clustered in the shadow of Pasadena and Houston?
Sure, I'll be glad to. Um, First, people need to understand that there's, as I've indicated, around 31 cities here in Harris County, and these are the small cities. And Houston, obviously, is the big person on the block, followed secondly by Pasadena. There is a perpetual set of tension between the larger cities in this state and state regulators, our governor, the legislative folks, and that tension between governance issues at the state level and at the Houston, San Antonio, Austin, those big cities generate new regulations from our state that also happen to impact Taylor Lake Village. And we're sort of caught in between that dilemma that is created. And so mayor and council, in addition to BAHAP, we come up with, please, legislative folks, consider the fact when you write these bills that apply mostly to Houston and San Antonio and Austin, that you don't impose things on our city, our little cities, that cause us additional complexity that actually don't impact our outcomes at all. One of the horrible examples they did is all of a sudden, because of the conflict of interest between Houston and the legislative folks, they imposed rules that we had to go out with every vendor and find out who's on their board, the people, um, their identity, literally the identity of everyone who is on a board. Well, many of the vendors in Taylor Lake Village are small business people. We've had the same vendor who mows and takes care of the general appearance of Taylor Lake Village for almost 15 years, and it's a Hispanic gentleman who doesn't speak great English, and I doubt very seriously whether he has a board of directors. But we maintain the city with these kind of folks, and and so we can't apply these rules that are imposed on us. Mayor and council tries to influence that. Mayor and council and BAHAP have passed many resolutions, spent many hours in Washington and in Austin with federal officials trying to get the coastal spine installed. And I have to say, our friends in New York managed to take care of Wall Street and put up all sorts of flood prevention around Wall Street before they do here in Texas. But we're working on it, and we had some great news the other day in that the general who runs the whole organization in control, which is the oh gosh, the name just went out of my brain, but quite literally, we now have his support for the Texas Spine. And so with that, we're going to be moving forward with this finally. But those are the kind of things that we try to influence. I work in support of the strategic plan for BAHEP, and that involves many people in our community, from education and et cetera.
Well, thank you, John. I think we kind of need to be winding up, but it sounds like maybe a fair characterization is maybe Mayberry RFD is worth protecting and preserving, and maybe we all need to work together to protect all our little Mayberry RFDs. So kind of with that closing thought, we'll go ahead and close out this inaugural City Connection. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to talking to our other local mayors. Thank you, John.
My pleasure.